Good afternoon, evening, whatever it is, and welcome to my booktube channel. That's the word. I keep looking for it. Scribbler, because I can't think of what else to call it. And that's what my Substack is. I don't have a lot to say today. I'm going to read because, well, I've miscounted. I've got like 7 chapters left. That's 7 weeks. Maybe I have to do 2 a week. I don't know. I have to sync it up with the other one. Anyways, we are back to Vienna in 1914, and we're going to start reading right now. There we go. There we are. Chapter 6. George and Anna arrived earlier than expected, both of them showing up together shortly before 1 o'clock. I was expecting them later, closer to 2:30 in the afternoon, as I told her the light would be brighter then. This time there was no rumbling thunder of an automobile to announce their arrival, no screaming children following them through the streets either, just the now familiar tap-tap-tap of George's violin bow on the door, soft, insistent, and somehow polite. I managed to answer the door even as I struggled to put my smock on. As I opened the door, Anna stepped inside, carrying a small paper bag that smelled of cinnamon and cooked apples, the bag stained heavily with butter that had melted into the paper. She was wearing a soft blue belly-poke dress that left little to the imagination once she took off the short-waisted jacket, as well as the sable wrap for warmth. When she saw me struggling with the smock, she put her hand on my shoulder and told me not to bother with it. If I can sit in front of you without any modicum of decency, the least you can do so is return the favor by not wearing that god-awful smock, she said with a smile as she opened the bag and pulled out a strudel. I could see the steam rising from it. I wear it for a good reason, I said, looking up at George. But I've seen you without it. I know what lies under the mask, she said in a light, laughing tone, almost as though she were mocking me, I thought. Is that what it is? You don't want me to see you? Or is it George, she asked, tearing the strudel into chunks and offering us each a piece. You don't have to wear it for my sake, George said with a smile as he declined the strudel and tossed the bowler onto the divan. He began pulling off his gloves, and when he had them off, tossed them beside the hat carelessly. I watched Anna unpinning the small hat she was wearing, laying it on the divan with a latent degree of focused attention, sticking the long pin through the hat and making certain not to disturb the ostrich feathers. She put a piece of the strudel in her mouth, but it was too big and too hot, and she fanned herself as she tried to catch her breath. She smiled around the strudel when she saw me watching her. I don't want your pity, I said, looking up at George when he turned back to look at me. I'm an ugly, misshapen little man. Life's taught me it's better not to let people stare at me for too long. It's something similar to staring at the sun. I prefer to keep it on for the moment, if you don't mind. I don't recall offering pity you, George said, with another smile as he reached into his pocket for a cigarette case and offered me one. I do remember that I promised I'd make you a rich man, and I will. I'm not here to stare at you and make you feel uncomfortable about yourself, he assured me. I don't care if you wear the smock or not. It's completely up to you. I prefer to wear it, as I've already said, I reminded him. So you did, he smiled, holding his lighter for me, so that I might light my cigarette. I'm not totally at ease in the presence of a woman, I added as an afterthought, especially a woman as beautiful as you, I said, with a slight bow to Anna as I lighted the cigarette. I wish I felt as beautiful as you think I am, she said, rearranging ringlets in her hair that fell down with the removal of her hat. Now, why don't you eat your strudel and stop worrying about what others think of you? My mother said the only thing that should matter is how you feel about yourself. I tend to believe that. If you think you're a monster because people say you are, they're probably saying it because that's what you project. People have a tendency to see what you want them to see. They see you as you see yourself. Are you going to hide from yourself for the rest of your life? She took her jacket off and laid it on the divan beside her hat. George picked them both up, sticking the pin through the jacket so that it held the hat in place, and then hung them together with her wrap. I was grateful for the distraction. I've long had the untapped inclination of not wanting to discuss my past. I believe people have a tendency to call me a monster because of my misshapen form, not for the person I am. You can think what you will about that. I've learned to accept it over the years, begrudgingly, true, but a lesson learned all the same. They never look at me and see me for the person I am, the person beneath this horrible exterior, choosing instead to turn away rather than accepting that I might be a real person. I used to prefer that people thought of me as a monster. It made the teasing less painful, the horror in their eyes with the chance of sighting me, and their obvious revulsion more acceptable. It made being who I am more bearable. That's something you can never explain to someone. People have a tendency to ostracize those of us who are different, not always purposely or with malicious intent, but because it's easier than confronting your fears. People choose instead to fear the unknown. I had an idea after you left yesterday, I said in an effort to change the subject. I walked to the easel and threw the drop cloth back. Anna approached the sketches with George and examined them. She stood with another piece of strudel in her hand, breaking it into dainty pieces and licking her fingertips with each bite she took. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. "Who are all those?" George asked, pointing at several sketched-in figures. "Slaves," I answered. "Slaves? And just what do you picture me as, or should I say, whom?" Anna asked. "You are my Cleopatra," I said, with a slight exaggerated bow. "And who do you propose to have pose as my slaves?" "You are," I replied. "How do you expect her to do that?" George asked. I smiled at the simplicity of the question, grateful he couldn't see my expression. It's always amazed me that people feel if you're creating something, you can't be expected to deviate from the norm. And by that I mean, if you're going to paint something that has more than a dozen people in the background, and if you're an artist of any talent, why is it so difficult to believe that you can't draw on your own past to create a face that's acceptable? I have a number of paintings where the people in the background resemble people I've known over the years. There are several portraits of my mother in numerous crowds. "Do you see this one?" I said, pointing to a roughed-in sketch behind the divan. I imagine she's holding a platter of fruit for the queen to select something from. She's bent over slightly. It's that same subservient bow we all learn at an early age. I stopped, looking up at Anna. I thought perhaps I may have said too much, but when I looked up at her, she looked at me with a tight smile, and I realized she understood exactly what I was talking about. I went on with what I was saying before George had a chance to comment, as I felt certain he would not. He would, had I not continued. "Since I don't have anyone else to model for it, I'll have Frau Davidova, please," she said as she took another bite of her strudel and offered me one of her smiles. She put her hand on my shoulder, and I felt an intense desire igniting within me. I could feel the blood rush to my face and was grateful to be hiding behind the mask. "Anna, call me Anna. If anyone brings you strudel in the morning, the least you can do is call them by their name." "I agree," George said. "Even more so if you've seen them naked. George, you have the awful habit of taking something beautiful, people say, and turning it into something ugly. Did you know that? You do it all the time. Do you think it might have something to do with the fact that you're not involved with anyone? There's no one to censor what you say or think. But then, I suppose if you were married, you'd be just like every other man I've ever met, and be involved with a mistress." "Thank you, Anna," I said awkwardly, as I tried to hide the smile I felt tugging at the edge of my lips. I turned back to the easel and went on with my explanation. "I'll have Anna stand behind the divan here, and she'll hold the plate as I draw her. Then I'll move her to the side, draw her in another pose, and then move her here." I pointed to all the different places I wanted her to stand. "And all these women are naked?" George smiled. "Why, you don't like the idea?" Anna asked before I even had the chance to say anything. "I think it's perfect." She turned briefly, looking at the paintings against the wall and studying them before she moved towards them, bending down to sort through them once again. "If that's what you think artistic license means, how do I get my hands on one?" George said with a laugh. "I want this To be my best painting, I said, as if that would be explanation enough. I could sense Anna's confidence in me growing as she stole a look at me over her shoulder every so often while she leafed through the paintings against the wall. If I'm going to spend that much time on it, I want it to be perfect, I added. I want it to be my masterpiece. All you have to do is tell me where to stand, she said. She was a petite woman and didn't have to worry about hitting her head on the low sloping ceiling. I watched her follow the line of paintings along the wall. These women, George asked finally, who will they be? Just the faces of women whom I find interesting for various reasons. I usually sketch them from memory, or sometimes it's a combination of things. What do you mean you paint them from memory? Don't you ever leave this place? What about food and water? He asked. I don't go as often as I used to, if that's what you want to know, I said softly. I get my water from the fountain around the corner. Everyone knows me there. When I eat the same place because it's all I can afford. Most of the time I buy a loaf of bread and a piece of salami or some Dutch cheese and eat it here. But you're an artist. Vienna is one of the most beautiful cities on the continent. I should know. I've been to most of them. You should be out painting every day. You'd think that, wouldn't you? I said, my voice and tone somewhat curt. But what? I used to go out into the streets, and now not so much. And you don't think going out into the streets will help you find the right face for the picture? Or that perhaps you'll be inspired by something you see? Why do you care who I put in the painting? Do you have someone in mind? I asked with a note of caution. What? Of course he does, Anna said with a laugh as she stood up and faced us. He wants you to paint Novak's sister-in-law. Am I being that obvious? George smiled. Do you want me to put you in as well? I asked, happy to change the subject from me to him. There's nothing better than a man's vanity to take one's mind off of something. Me? What for? I was thinking I'd paint a portrait of Cleopatra, but I could just as easily make it Caesar and Cleopatra. How would you like to be Julius Caesar, or one of his aides? Or maybe I should make it David and Bathsheba. You could be Job or Uriah. Don't you want to be immortalized? Maybe you should think about making Novak Caesar, George suggested, and even as he said it, I could picture the painting in my mind's eye. I'll be seeing Novak later, after rehearsal. I'll ask him what he thinks. I'm sure he'll say yes, George said, and then picked up his hat, slipped on his gloves, and walked towards the door. You won't forget? I asked as he closed the door behind himself. I looked at Anna. He won't forget, will he? Probably, she laughed. He forgets about everything once he starts playing his silly violin. So you'll tell Novak then? Me? No, I want it to be a surprise, remember? If I ask him if he wants to be in the painting, it won't be a surprise, will it? I think it's a wonderful idea, though. But will the Count? Almost as soon as George was gone, Anna began to undress. I took my smock off and laid it to the side over the back of my chair. I felt as if I could delay her actions if I purposely slowed my own. I was still uncomfortable with the idea of seeing her naked, and no matter how many times I told myself that if she was comfortable with it, why should I not be? There was a bolt of velvet hanging on the back of the divan, and I threw it over her shoulders. I made certain to ask her if she was cold. It was no trouble for me to make a fire, I said, but she smiled and told me she was fine. I thought perhaps she sensed my discomfort because she reached a hand out for mine as I laid the velvet across her shoulders and looked up at me with a smile. I tried to hide my discomfort as I helped her to her feet and moved her into place behind the divan, giving her one of my chipped plates. Then I waddled behind the screen to examine the scene. I came back out a moment later, turned her slightly to the left, tilting her head to the right and rearranging her hair, brushing it with my gnarled fingers so that it hung over her shoulder, when I touched her breast quite by accident. She shifted her eyes and looked directly at me. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks and began to stammer an apology as I made my way back to the safety of the screen. She looked at me and gave me something of a mischievous grin, something that I haven't seen from another woman since my mother, and then let out a genuine laugh that set me at my ease. "Do I make you uncomfortable, Herr Tchaikovsky?" she asked, although I was certain she knew that the answer to that question was in advance. "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" I smiled. I came out from behind the screen again and moved her right arm forward in an effort to catch the light, when I noticed a small bruise beside her left breast where it lay in the shadows of her rib cage. I touched it lightly. She winced, and I apologized. "You've hurt yourself," I said. "I didn't realize it showed," she said, and looked down at it briefly. "How'd you do it?" "I'd rather not say. It's somewhat silly on my part," she added with what I thought was a forced smile. It seemed obvious to me that she was lying. Something told me not to pursue it, but I couldn't stop myself. I didn't hurt you, did I? Can we get on with this? The Count's meeting me at the theater. They're starting rehearsals for a new production next season, and he's promised to get me into the chorus. Well, George has promised to get me in. He's the guest violinist. I told you. I didn't realize it was visible. You simply caught me off guard," she explained. "Of course," I said, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. "Try not to move. I only need you like this for 15 minutes. Half an hour would be better, but we'll see how it goes," I added as I moved in behind the screen again. There was something that didn't feel right about the angle, and I knew, even before I sketched it with my watercolors, that I'd make changes to it. There you go. It's all done. I've finished. I made a couple of little boo-boos. I know, that's because, whatever. But I tried to slow down purposely. I'm trying to get it done, as well as I can, I guess, for all that it is. Anyways, so that is that. I have to call it a day, because now I have to go down and get dinner ready, because this is like coming out right now as soon as I upload it. So I'm going to try and pause it this time for real. And I'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Anyways, have a good day. Bye-bye.